So today I'm going to be making a sourdough starter. If you see a puppy running around on the floor or hear her, she's 7 months old. She's not really easily controlled and she is currently counter surfing, so I'm just hoping she doesn't jump up here and mess up what I'm doing. How we're going to start is you need a jar. I'm just using a 14-ounce jar. And then I don't use the ring lid, instead I use a plastic covering with an elastic on it. So you're going to start by zeroing out the scale with the jar on top of it. You will do that by either hitting the tare button. You can also do this by volume. I just prefer to do it by weight. I really hope my husband edits some of this barking out because so what you're going to do is what you're going to do is you are going to take 14 grams of water, or 1 tablespoon by weight or by volume. So I do prefer to use a weight when I'm doing sourdough because I find it to be easier, but I have done it by volume as well and it works just as fine, or just as good rather. But I choose to do it by weight, especially when I'm at home because I have a kitchen scale, so it just makes it easier for me. I always add my water first. Every time except when I'm starting the starter, I will actually measure out my water separately from inside the starter jar. And why I will do that is because I don't want to put too much water and have to make excess starter that I won't use. So I use my Brita filter. We actually have 2 Brita filters. We keep one at room temp and the other one in the fridge. So I use our room temp Brita filter. So once again, I'm going to do 14 grams of water, which I already put too much water in here. So I'm just going to scoop some of that out and into my sink. To get down to 14 grams. And then once I get that down to 14 grams, I'm going to take 14 grams of all-purpose whole wheat or bread flour. I use King Arthur's bread flour. I tried, the first time I made a sourdough starter, I tried to make it with whole wheat and it didn't work very well because it takes longer to create the yeast. So keep that in mind if you're using a whole wheat, that it can take longer to get it active. So I use bread flour. I find it to be easier to work with. I've fed mine with whole wheat flour once it's established and don't have the same issue I have when I'm trying to start a starter with whole wheat. My first starter that I tried to make with whole wheat, I actually never got fully active. I've known people that can. I just wasn't able to. Second one I made was with bread flour and it was so much easier. So that's what I use now just because I find it to be easier. Actually, that starter I had made previously died because I had to stop eating gluten for a while. I was trying to learn to deal with my inflammation from my rheumatoid arthritis. So I gave that a shot. Didn't really work for me because I love bread and pasta and all of the things, and I know there are gluten-free options, but they're not really easy on the budget. So I ended up not doing that for very long. But while I was doing that, my starter died. So that's why I'm creating this new one. By the way, I'm using the Sourdough Everyday cookbook. They have a starter timeline and guide for you in it. So that's what I'm using to get mine established, is what I used the first time I made a starter and it worked great. So I'm going to take 14 grams of this flour and add it. And you'll want to tare your scale in between adding the water and the flour so that it's easier to tell when you hit 14, or you can do the math, whichever way is easier for you and works best for you. And then I like to use like a flimsy spatula, like one of the rubber ones, to mix my starter when I'm mixing it. Anytime I'm mixing my starter is what I prefer to use, because I find it to be the easiest way to like scrape down the sides. So even when I'm establishing or doing the first step of establishing a starter, I still like to use a rubber one just out of habit. You can really use anything to mix it, just make sure all the flour is well incorporated. So what you'll be left with is like a really thick dough-like consistency. I don't know if you can see that, but it's like, I would say almost like a pizza dough type of consistency. It's not like super thin, it's not super duper thick, but I would say like almost pizza dough once it's sat out at room temperature is kind of what you're going for here. And then I like to scrape down my sides, kind of get it all lumped together. And so once that flour is thoroughly incorporated and you scrape down your sides, you're going to cover it. So I just take that plastic covering. I've heard of people using like muslin and a ring, just using the regular jar ring and not screwing it on all the way so that the air can escape. Do whatever works for you. For me, I find this to be easiest because if I have to feed it like early in the morning or anything, I can easily get it off and back on, because while I am a morning person, what I don't like to do first thing in the morning is try to figure out how to do a million different things. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a sticky note. I'm going to write established 10/8/23 because that's when I started it. And I like to know when I start it, and I'm just going to stick that on the side of the jar. And why I use a sticky note is that way it can be moved between the jars. In the past, I've also just written on my plastic top in like a wet erase marker, and that works well. But what I did find is sometimes the top would get wet while I was like making sourdough or other things with my starter or discard, and so I just kind of prefer a sticky note and a piece of tape. Why the piece of tape is because it tends to fall off if it's just a sticky note on the side of the jar. So I just stick the tape across the top of the sticky note and stick it on the side of my jar. And then I have when I started this starter. Now what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to pretty much just leave it for a couple of days. So what I'll do tomorrow, which you'll see, is I'll take off the lid and I'll stir it up. So once a day you want to mix it, and then I will keep you updated as we go on, like what it's supposed to look like, how that gets established, and what you're supposed to do every step of the way. But this is what like the first step looks like. I will be back on here tomorrow when I get home from work to show you the day 2 steps. So this is a 14-day process. So, and some of those days you have to do things like twice a day. So this video might be a little bit long, but it will be every step needed to start a sourdough starter from beginning to finish and what that looks like as well. So I'll see you tomorrow in different clothes and hopefully a less psychotic dog. Okay, so today's day 2 of sourdough. So I'm gonna grab my trusty book. And what it says is I need to open the jar and stir it. I probably won't see many changes today, but today and tomorrow I'll notice that it'll go from that thick paste that was almost like pizza dough to more the consistency of yogurt. So what I've seen in the past is mine gets pretty liquidy. Mine gets pretty liquidy by day 3. But today I just mix it up. It's a very sticky consistency, and kind of more wet than yesterday. So you just open it and mix it, and then you cover it again. And that's all you do on day 2. All right, so today is day 3, and my hair's really crazy today. So for day 3, you'll start to see some bubbles and the smell will start to change in your starter. And so you should start to see that activity So what I'm going to do today, again, is I'm just going to stir it. I thought I was ready for a water and cup, but I'm not. So I have my rubber spatula, and I'm just going to give her a stir. And by tomorrow, what we should see is she should start to liquefy. So that is all I do again today. And I will see you guys tomorrow. All right, so today is day 4. I initially thought it was day 3. I was wrong. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to measure out some flour and some water and do our first feed. So I'm going to get a small bowl to measure my water in first. All right, so then I'm going to tare my scale to this bowl. I'm going to measure out 14 grams of water, which is also 1 tablespoon. All right, and that is 14 grams. So we're just going to pour that into the starter that is already starting, and take my spatula, which you can use whatever you want to stir it, and you stir the water in before you add any flour. What that does is it allows the starter to fully coat the flour so that you have a more active starter, and makes it easier to coat all the flour in the starter if you mix the starter into the water. Then I'm going to take my bread flour. Probably shouldn't have tapped on that while I was talking. I'm going to take my bread flour, and I am going to measure out 14 grams of bread flour, which once again, you can use whatever flour you want. I use King Arthur's bread flour. I've used many other flours in the past as well. And then we want 14 grams of flour as well, or 2 tablespoons. And if you're measuring volume on flour, you're going to take your tablespoon and a regular spoon and grab the regular spoon, put the flour in the regular spoon, and pour it over the tablespoon, so it's got that light and airiness and you don't get too much flour. Okay, and that is 14. So I'm going to mix that in. And then your starter smell will start to change. It kind of smells like dirty socks, but that is just signs that it is becoming active. It won't stay that smell. What I like to do when I'm doing my starter is I get my fingers a little bit wet with water. I just use tap water for this part, and I use my fingers to push down the starter. The water on your fingers helps it to not stick. So that is day 4. Just that one feed today of 14 grams and 14 grams. 14 grams flour, 14 grams water. Or that also is 1 tablespoon of water and 2 tablespoons of flour if you are doing volume, because not everybody has a kitchen scale. All right, so today is day 5. So for days 5 through 9, we're actually going to do the same thing. What the book says is, your starter may appear flat and experience a lull in activity during this period. The smell will change drastically, but this is completely normal. It might be a little off-putting at first, but then it'll start to smell sweet like a sourdough starter. And why that is because natural yeast in the sourdough culture are beginning to build strength. So we're starting to feed them once a day so they will continue to grow in strength. So what we're going to do is, I like to switch jars at this point when I'm feeding my starter. It keeps the dirt cleaner. If you use the same jar over and over and over, it does start to get a little dirty, or look dirty rather. It's just personal preference. Most people don't switch jars every time they feed. I find it to be an easier way to feed. So what I'm going to start with is I'm going to tare my jar. So zero out my scale, and then I have my starter, which is looking quite bubbly. I don't know if it'll come up on camera, especially because the light is back here. But I will insert a picture of it for you. It does smell a little off-putting still. Kind of like, does smell a bit off-putting still, kind of like a diluted version of what it smelled like yesterday. So still kind of gross. Then I'm going to grab my trusty tools, my spatula have my spoon. And then I'm gonna move my camera up a little bit because I don't want you just staring at my nose. All right, so then what we're going to do in the jar that we zeroed out the scale with is we are going to put 14 grams of starter, which is what we have in this jar. All right, so that's 14 grams. With the leftovers, you're just going to discard them, so throw them away. Once your sourdough is fully active and smells like a regular sourdough starter, you can actually use that discard to bake and make other recipes, which I will show you later on once I have some discard built up. I've done discard brownies before, which was really fun, and discard pancakes. And there's a lot of different things you can do with sourdough discard. But what I'm going to do with this is pour it down the drain and dilute it with water because it's not active enough to keep yet. Alright, so once again, I'm going to grab a small bowl to measure my water in because I don't trust myself, and I have on many occasions poured too much water in it and had to feed extra. So today we're actually going to put more water than we have been. We're going to put 30 grams of water, which is just doubling, so it's 2 tablespoons, whereas before you were using 1 tablespoon. So that is 30 grams of water. So I'm going to tear my scale again, grab my flour, and add 30 grams of flour, which is a 1/4 cup of flour, and you'll measure it the same way you would in a tablespoon, because 4 tablespoons is a 1/4 cup, and you'll just pour it over your cup. And then my spatula, I just mix that all together. And when you're mixing, you just want to make sure you don't have any dry flour left. So I like to go all the way around and like rub down the sides and incorporate it into the middle. I find it to be the easiest way to ensure I don't have any dry flour. We'll do that same thing days 5 through 9. I'll try to video it still so that you can kind of see the whole process a couple of times. I might forget a couple of days just because the weekend is coming up. It's currently Thursday. I have my finals due tomorrow at school, and I also work full-time. So since it's the same thing over and over, if I forget a day, I'm not going to completely start over. Then you'll just recover it and let that sit for the next 24 hours. That being said, when you're just letting it sit, you'll typically want to choose a nice like room temperature spot. You won't want it to be too warm or too cold. In the fridge, it won't activate because cold slows it down. And if the area is too warm, typically about 70 to 75 degrees is that sweet spot. Closer to 70 typically. But if you keep your house colder than that, you can set your jar actually either inside your stove if you're really good about not turning your stove on without looking in it, or you can set it on top of the stove so that every time your stove is on, it's warming up. So I've known a lot of people to keep it inside their stove. I can't because I will never look inside my stove before I turn it on. So I keep mine on the counter next to the stove, but we also keep our house pretty warm. So today is day 6. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take our starter, we're going to throw away all but 14 grams, which is approximately 1 tablespoon, and we are going to feed it again. And then you should be seeing some activity in your starter, like mine's bubbled, and I can see where it rose after I fed it. You might not be seeing much activity, especially if you've never had a starter in your house before. Why that happens is like the yeast changes in your house when you have a starter. So since I've had a starter before, my house already has some of those bacteria in the air that is required to keep the starter very active and happy. Next, no ma'am. So let's get started. Alright, so I'm going to start by measuring out 15 grams. It does still smell slightly gross, but not as putrid as it has been smelling. So it's starting to get more of a sweet smell. It's just not quite there yet. and you cannot use this discard for baking still. You won't be able to keep your discard for baking until day 14. So we're almost halfway there. All right, and that's 14. So give me a sec. Hey. All right, so we're going to do what we did yesterday. All right, so we rinsed out that jar. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna measure out our water. We do want 30 grams of water again today, which again is 2 tablespoons if you are doing by volume. All right, and then we pour that in. Then we take our rubber spatula, which this is a clean one I just pulled out of the drawer. If my husband edited that part out, because I wasn't actually speaking. And then we add our flour. So in between each step, you're going to want to zero out your scale still. I just don't want to have to say that every day because you are seeing the same thing for 5 days or so. And then you're going to do 30 grams of flour again. So then we're going to take our spatula and start folding it in. All that flour incorporated. So then that's ready to cover for another 24 hours. All right, good morning. So today is day 8. I didn't video it yesterday. I really just wasn't feeling very good. So I still fed my starter. Same process you've seen the past couple of days, but I just didn't video it. But I'm gonna video it again today. It is still the same process. So I'm not really going to talk you through it just because I've already said it repeatedly. So I'm just going to do that. That's it. All right, so starting today, we are going to feed our starter twice a day. So it's night time right now because I usually feed mine in the evening, just in my normal day today. So what I will be doing is adding the morning feeding as my second time. So like tomorrow will be day 10, second feeding. And then tomorrow night will be day 11, first feeding. So the fact that I feed mine in the evening does kind of mess up this part just a little bit, but it'll be the same process we've been following. So you turn your scale on, you grab an empty jar, and then you tear your scale. You're gonna put 30 grams or 14 grams of starter like you have been, which is right there. Then you're going to take your 30 grams of water, and that is 30 grams. So I'm going to pour that into my starter. Then I'm going to get my spatula and mix that into my starter so that the starter dissolves in the water. So we zero out our scale again, and then we add our 30 grams of flour. I'm out of bread flour, so I'm currently using all-purpose flour. All right, and then mix that all together. And then days 10 through 14, you will feed your starter twice a day. Rinse off our spatula and scrape down the sides of the jar. And then we cover it, and we will come back to it in the morning.